And now I'd like to introduce today's interviewee. Bradley Caffee is the author of the Chase Runner series, and the second book came out earlier this week. I would describe the Chase Runner series as a little Ender's Game, a little Hunger Games, a little Maze Runner, and just a whole lot of action. Bradley, I have you to either blame or thank for me staying up too late and trying to read just one more chapter on a day that I probably should not have stayed up late. So thank you for that. Now, Bradley jumped into fiction writing a little later in his career, and he has just an interesting story of how he got there. So rather than spoiling that in my introduction to him, I think I'm going to let him share that for himself. So everybody, please welcome author Bradley Caffee. And I'm going to welcome.
Hey, Tim.
All right. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while because I don't know a whole lot about dystopian fiction in comparison to some other genres, and you're really passionate about it, so I'm sure you have some great thoughts to share. The first question I really wanted to ask was, how did you discover your love for storytelling?
For me, storytelling really actually began in a really non-traditional place. I have no degree in writing. I had no background in writing. In fact, I despised putting pen to paper when I was a student. Did everything I could to avoid having to write papers whenever I could. Storytelling for me actually came through oral presentation. I was a minister for 13 years, and I started to discover that one of the best ways I could convey truth was through the power of story. Many of the sermons I used to preach on a weekly basis, I would begin them with some form of tale of my own life, usually some kind of real recounting of something that happened with my kids or in my past. And it got to the point where I started getting comment after comment from people that it was really their favorite part, that this story that I would always open with, people would look forward to it every week, and it helped them remember the truth. And I discovered that story has a lot of power, and over time, I felt like it was a skill I began to develop.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So did you have an interest in reading at that time, or was that something that you discovered a little later?
You know, I'll be honest, I would say my 20s and maybe part of my 30s was a real hiatus from reading. I think a lot of young people feel this way. The books that they're required to read in school sometimes can kind of burn them out on reading. Other people are just bookworms, but that was never really my thing. The reading I found later in adulthood, and I finally gave myself permission to get back into fiction and start reading those. I used to feel a little guilt as a pastor. I need to be reading serious pastoral type books. And when I finally picked up a fiction book and read it again, I realized, man, it was a great place for my brain to just go. It was something completely different from what I was doing, and really just opened up new worlds to me and became a real joy to dive into a book. So it was something I really had to return to later in life.
That's great. So yeah, so you were a pastor for over a decade, and we talked a little bit about this in our promotion for this talk, but would you like to share your story of really what led you to kind of shift with your life, and in the process of that, discover writing?
Yeah, the writing really came to me at a really low point of my life. As I said, I was a minister for 13 years, but that actually came to an end in 2015. After some very difficult situations in one church, and then ending up at another church where things were just really hard, I actually experienced pastoral burnout. And, it really, for any person in the church, you got to know your pastor is under an extreme amount of stress at all times. And it's more and more pastors are burning out every single day. It's something I actually have quite a heart for, as I'm watching church after church after church, minister after minister kind of just not make it. You don't see these people in it for a lifetime anymore. And I ended up becoming a victim of the very same thing, something I swore I would never do. Suddenly got to a point in my ministry where I could barely lift my head off the pillow anymore, and I just couldn't do it. And for the sake of my own health and the health of my family, I had to make my exit from the ministry, and I found myself in this place of, well, what now? What do I do? Taking I had a master's degree, but it was a ministry degree, and the business world was just not interested in that. And I found myself really lost in life. Here I was in my mid 30s, and I had no career. Everything I had built was gone overnight. And most of my contacts, most of my network was in the ministry world, and that was not helpful. And it was late one night in this really dark season when I woke up in the middle of the night and found myself just needing to grab a tablet and take a bunch of notes. I had had this extremely vivid dream, and I don't know what compelled me to take notes on that, but I did. And I went back to sleep, and I got up the next morning and I looked at what I had written down, and I said, wow, this is a fantastic story. And I started to share this a little bit with a mentor of mine who was coaching me right after my burnout. And he finally looked at me and he said, Bradley, the only time I see a spark of joy in you is when you talk about maybe writing this story down. He said, I think you need to try your hand at writing fiction. And I thought, that's crazy. But here I was unemployed and with nothing else to do. And so I found myself at a Panera Bread a couple days a week for 8 hours at a time. And that's how the manuscript for The Chase came about. I just kind of poured myself into this book. And when I finished, I turned back to page 1 and reread it. And I realized a lot of the feelings I had about burnout and what I felt at the time was a failure of my own, I had inserted that into the main character. And as a result, the story became very personal. So I found writing at a very difficult, dark time. And maybe it's why I gravitated toward dystopian literature. But that's really how I got into it. It was a back door. I never set out to do this. I didn't even think the story was all that much until I finally gave it to someone who was in the writing world. And they said, Bradley, this thing's meant for more. I think you need to try to do something with this. So that's really how I got started.
Wow, that's really cool. So like, who first helped you as a writing mentor per se, or like writing feedback? Where did you grow in that? Because like you said, you hadn't really been in the writing world so much. This just came up from your love for storytelling.
Yeah, I unlike most, I never took like a piece of my manuscript and have someone look at it. No one was editing me along the way. I called up a good friend of mine who had been a bookworm her whole life. She was a former student of mine from when I used to be a youth pastor. And I just asked her, I said, hey, I'm thinking of doing this thing. Would you just read along with me? And I'll send you chapters as I finish them, and you just let me know what you think. And she coached me. She helped me a little bit with the story. She helped me with some of the character development, fill in some plot holes here and there. She was invaluable to me. But really, I didn't have anyone truly in the writing world look at it till I had a completed manuscript. And suddenly I was walking around with a couple hundred pages, not knowing what to do with it. And when I relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, through a friend of mine, I got connected to someone who was a freelance editor. And, she just so happened to specialize in young adult literature. And I said, well, can I hire you to take a look at this thing? And, she kind of gave me a friends and family discount, and she looked at the book, and she was actually the one who came back to me. She delivered her edits to me, and she said, Bradley, you need to do something with this. And she was the one who first opened the door to talk to me about getting an agent and pursuing publishing houses and going to writers' conferences. I didn't even know those were a thing. I had zero exposure to the writing world, and to have someone just kind of open that door and say, just go and get an education in the writing world, that was invaluable for me. And I've been to multiple conferences every single year since, and just trying to soak in everything I can learn about the business, because I feel like I'm coming into this real late in the game, and here I have published works, and I still don't know hardly anything. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's always more to learn. So, was this always going to be a series, or at what point did it branch off from that first book?
I think it was about halfway through writing the first book, I realized this needs to be more than the one story. Obviously, the dream that I had had, the first book is based around that, and it has a pretty solid ending to it. It really wraps up, ties a nice bow, but there's really also a sense left of, well, what now? At the end of the story, what's going to happen? And I realized I wanted to keep telling that story, and I had zero idea of where it was going to go. Each of the three books in the trilogy I've written in a very different way with different methods, so to speak. And it was only the first book that I really had a sense of the beginning and the end. And the other books kind of were a little bit more free flowing, as I felt like I was on a self discovery of, okay, what's next? What's going to happen to these characters? And so that was kind of unique for me. So I would say it really was not the original intent, but it became pretty clear after a while there had to be more than one book for this story.
For sure. So dystopian fiction, right? And like you said, grim, dark part of your life. It's a grim and a dark genre, but you found it a source of hope during that time. How so? Try to persuade me here. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some people who are very skeptical of this.
And rightly so, because to be honest, there are dystopian books out there that really don't end on a very positive note. A lot of them, even ones that have been made into major motion pictures, kind of end with this kind of sort of ending, like a little bit of hopelessness, a little bit of letdown, a little bit of, I guess things resolved, but things aren't great. And it is one of the characteristics that sometimes this genre can take on. But as I began to write, and I feel like others do this in dystopian, there's also an incredible opportunity to show how in the midst of darkness, when things are at their worst, which is what dystopian really is, it's all about the world as it shouldn't be, there's an opportunity to show how brightly light shines in darkness. They talk about the power of even a single candle. If you were in pitch blackness, how far away you could see the flame of a single candle, that it burns incredibly brightly in darkness. And I think there's that opportunity as well in the dystopian genre, that someone can rise up, or a group of people can rise up and kind of become this positive source of hope in the worst of times. And I think it's no accident that this sort of all kind of happened right before we as a world entered into our own dystopia these last couple of years. Here we are with the whole world being turned upside down with a pandemic, and life just not the same as things used to be. And there's a real opportunity for people to show kindness and be loving to other people and go out of their way to help their fellow man, fellow human with them, and be a source of light when things feel really dark and hopeless. So really, for me, that's the brand in which the genre took on. And as I wrote, I wanted to be sure that even though things were bleak and ugly and no good, that all along there was this thread that, but hope reigns when things are at their darkest, and hope shines very brightly. And I think you can see that thread throughout the trilogy, and I've seen it in other people who are starting to write dystopian. It's what gravitates me towards it, because I want to know, in this world that I live in that is a little topsy-turvy right now, or maybe a lot topsy-turvy, I want to know that hope is possible. And the dystopian genre has helped me see that a little bit.
Yeah. No, I love that image of a candle, so small, but yeah, the darkness, the brighter that light shines. So with your audience then, you're writing YA. Do you have particular people in mind? Because you worked with youth as a pastor son, right?
Yes.
But did that ever come into as you were writing, or did it sort of like just naturally you realized this is who is going to want to read it?
I think it was just a very natural place for me to land, having worked with young people in the past. I was a youth pastor for the first 6 years of my career in the ministry. Have always had a heart for young people. post ministry, I also served as a high school teacher for a little while. Just love students at that age, and such a pivotal age where they are discovering who they are. And that struggle, I think, is one of the things that I love to tell stories about. And truly, I think, obviously YA has become a little bit broader in its appeal in recent years. A lot of people are reading YA right now, but to write young people, it just puts them naturally in a place where a world turned against them makes the odds seem overwhelming, and it just fit the story really well. It's an audience I'm comfortable speaking to. I've spoken to for many years since at conferences and camps and things like that. So picturing a young person was relatively easy for me, and it was the audience probably I just connect with the most. So it was a natural place for me to land.
Absolutely. So what are some dystopian fiction books that inspired you, maybe helped you see that glimmer of hope that you wanted to reflect in your own work?
Oh, goodness. I would actually have to say there weren't any prior to writing this trilogy that I found. I mean, I ran all the popular ones, The Hunger Games, The Maze Runner, these kinds of things. A lot of them have very bleak endings. I think it made me want to do something different. And I've come across some other authors now that I think have begun to write a lot more hope. I've found some people that are doing the same thing. But a lot of those super popular dystopian books that were out there, dystopian was just the big thing for a while. We all know that. And those books were probably the first ones I was exposed to, but they don't end very positively. So I think I actually had a negative inspiration going on here where I wanted to do something that I hadn't found, and then I discovered others are doing it too.
Yeah. No, that's great. Seeing something and going, I could do that, but better. At least
maybe, I don't know if I would say better, but different. Some of those authors are really good, and I don't know if I hold a candle to them, but
hey, you are holding a candle. You are holding a candle of hope, right?
For sure.
So what has been most rewarding to you being an author?
I found just incredible joy in it. It's not something I expected. Who wants to sit at a laptop for hours on end and crank out words on a page? But to see characters that begin in my imagination suddenly take shape on the page, and for me, as I write characters, a lot of the times I write with only a mild plan in place. I like to find out what happens to someone. So they end up in a certain situation, and I ask, well, what if they did this? And I just start writing. And I feel like I'm in their shoes and I'm living out what's going on for them, and get to see, well, if they made this choice, then all these kinds of things start happening. And it's just kind of entering into this little world that I'm creating, but also just the very finding out how much I begin to understand about myself, because I think every author naturally writes their own story into their stories. And it's a real window on my own soul to go back and read what I've written and to see, hey, I know where that came from, or I've never seen that before. What is that telling me about myself? Why did I make that person respond that way? And I suddenly, it kind of opens my own soul and helps me understand a little more about me. And it's actually been part of my journey from burnout to a place of much, better emotional health. I've been working for years to kind of pull out of that darkness, and the Lord has helped me a great deal. And writing has been a part of that, because there's been an expression to kind of pour out a lot of the things that were pent up inside, and getting to reread those has helped me process and refine joy.
That's really cool. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience here? Any big takeaways from your story that you would like them to remember?
Oh, goodness. The primary character, I don't want to give any spoilers away. I want to be careful about that. But Willis, the main character, in especially the chase, he's a young man with a lot of expectations. And for those who've read the book, they know that the weight, he literally is bearing the weight of the world, and everyone expects him to win. And he deals with that pressure and ultimately has to change his worldview and struggles with that tension between what everyone says he should do and who he actually is. And I think for young people, the understanding that is one of the pivotal moments of growth that every young person needs to come to understand, because every young person has expectations thrown at them from parents, from schools, from mentors, from their church, from leaders, from siblings, from friends. Everyone wants them to be something, but part of their self-discovery is understanding who God made them to be as an individual. And that's a dialogue between them and God primarily, and they need to find out who that is, even if it goes against the expectations that everybody else has placed upon them. And I just think that's, one of the arcs in the story that really just speaks to me, because it's something I'm having to redo as now an ex-pastor and rebranding my whole life and what I'm about and what is my career and what do I do with my life now that everything is a mess a little bit. I think young people identify with that because it's the season in life that they are in of having to discover, who am I really? And am I brave enough to be that person, even though it might not line up with what everyone else has for me?
That's great. That is a great note to end on. And I am really excited to read The Choice when it comes out and see what happens to Willis and Perrin and all the rest next. Oh, you got your copy ahead of time.
Oh yeah.
Being an author. See, everybody, if you're an author, you get the book before everyone else. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Bradley. And everybody, if you have any questions for him, again, feel free to reach out to him on his website. He'd be happy to hear from you.
It's my absolute pleasure, Tim. I love being on today.